everybody for sitting in here. And when I was given the opportunity to moderate this panel, I was super excited because culture is the backbone of any organization, right? It's the foundational element of an organization's success. It's how you differentiate yourself amongst your peers and create an environment where everybody feels like they can individually succeed, but they're also working towards this intangible component, right? And I think it could be a company's greatest asset or its demise. It's not tangible, but its impact is, right? And I think when you think about culture, you have to look at how it's created. And obviously it's from top down, but it's really the employees that carry out an organization's culture. And so, we're here to talk about employee engagement and how that impacts culture and how that impacts our industry, but really it applies to any business. And I'm super excited to have 4 industry experts here with various different perspectives, from operator to attorney, hiring, HR. So I think that this is going to be a really great panel, and I'll give a quick background on each of our panelists, and then I'll stop talking and let them do the talking. But Melissa Greenberg, Senior Associate Attorney at Hellbraun Levy in the firm's employment practices, commercial litigation, and cannabis groups. Hellbraun Levy is a full-service cannabis and hospitality law firm representing cannabis companies, restaurants, and hotels. Aisha Alves, Executive Recruiter with Flower Hire and Director of Programming with Cannabis Lab. She focuses on partnering with companies and professionals to build careers and promote community across the industry. John Pennington, or some call him JP, if you're close enough with him, is the founder and CEO of Proper Cannabis, a vertically licensed company in St. Louis, Missouri. Over the past 3 years, they've had tremendous growth, growing from 10 employees to 450, and have received recognition as a company and brand of the year. And John, really focuses on culture as being the key to their success. And finally, we have Brett Puffenbarger. He's an award-winning B2B marketer, but his journey spans beyond public relations, business development, and brand cultivation, driven by his academic pursuits. He's currently in the process of getting his PhD, and grounded in his master's in PR, bachelor's in media communications, and he's currently serving as the VP of Marketing for Greenleaf Business Solutions. Give a round of applause for the panelists. Awesome. So John, would love to kick it off with you as an operator in this space and really try to understand what differentiates you among your peers and brands in general from a cultural standpoint.
Hello. I think businesses are like, team, any team, or like a band, or like a theatrical performance, or any organization. And, I think it all starts with, mission. What is the goal of that organization? What's the goal of the team? And we talk about that a lot at Proper. What's the mission of what we do? And then it triggers to the ethos is why. Why do you do what you do? Whether you're an athlete or you're in a band or you're me or you're you need to define those. And then we go to the values, which is why, or how, excuse me. So it's the what, it's the why, and it's the how. And whether you're a bud tender, you are a janitor, you are the director of cultivation, I think it's super crucial to know how you fit into the greater good of the organization itself. And then everybody has a role within the theme of the mission and the vision and the values of the organization. And we practice those super well and intently. And at least on a quarterly basis, when we get with our teams, they've got to pick a value. And they need to share it with a coworker and say, hey, this is what I want to work on. And they're not words, it's the behavior. And I think that good organizations put to practice the things that they think about. And that's what we try to do.
No, that's great. And obviously it comes from the top down, right? And I think it's been great to see what you guys have implemented and how it's carried out by the folks that you've brought on. And One thing, and just to piggyback off that, going from 10 people to 450 in 3 years, right? Like, how do you maintain your culture as an organization with that type of scale?
Yeah, last year, I think we had like 40 to 50 promotions within our organization, and we've used groups to help us make sure that we have the right people in the right seats. But I think it gets back to like empowering them. You have to focus on what do they need, not what they want. What are the resources, the leadership, the coaching, for them to be successful. I think when people know that they're being valued, they're being heard, and that their peers and their bosses see them as intimately important to the success, then good things happen. I think when you have good people, we say like you can solve for good problems, and we've done a pretty good job with that.
That's great. And transitioning to Aisha, when you talk about good people, it starts with the hiring process, right? And making sure that you're bringing in a good cultural fit to avoid turnover. And so, at Flower Hire, what do you all focus on in the talent sector to make sure that you're placing the right people?
It's a great point, Eric, because if you're trying to build culture in your organization, it is unfair to put all of that, burden or responsibility on your current team. If you are bringing in the right people from the beginning, it makes that lift, so much easier. So in the work that we do at Flower Hire, for example, it is our specialty to talk to people who are either, making their first pivot into the cannabis industry, or people who are already in the cannabis industry and looking to make a move within, right? And when we ask people, why do you want to make a move? Why cannabis? Why now? Like 9 times out of 10, it is a question of culture. Maybe they're saying the organization that I'm working in, they don't have a great culture. Or I want to go to a place where I feel like I'm part of something bigger than myself. Like this is a mission and culture driven industry, right? And so as we talk to people, we look for kind of like this intangible set of qualities that they all come to the table with, whether it be their willingness to be in the gray area, their willingness to be in a culture that is kind of startup and by nature very nimble. So, those are the things that we look for when we talk to candidates, because you cannot see that from a resume, right? I don't know how many of you guys are hiring managers, but those are the things that, really make a big difference if someone is the right fit for your company or not.
And at Flower Hire, what are some KPIs that you guys have seen, obviously being in the space for a multitude of years, around good versus poor culture, right?
I think it's very tricky to talk about good versus bad culture or poor culture, right? Because there are many types of corporate cultures out there, and I think it's hard to say whether it's good or bad. They're just different, right? You've got some cultures that are very much like a clan mentality, right? Where everyone makes decisions together, it's super collaborative, and that's great. And then there's other organizations which are very hierarchical, especially if we're talking about like the multi-state operators and kind of more established businesses. One is not better than the other, but as a professional, you want to enter an organization that lines up with your own values, right? So if we're talking about cannabis in general, up until now, it's kind of been like cannabis culture from a career standpoint is startup culture, right? It's you gotta fail fast, you gotta know how to pivot. How many times do you guys say pivot in a day? And I think everyone kind of has leaned on this catch-all response of like this big shrug, it's cannabis, right? And that kind of ends up being the answer to a lot of things. But as the industry is maturing and as all of these organizations are starting to grow and establish themselves and scale, that's not gonna cut it anymore. Cannabis companies need to figure out who they're gonna be moving forward. Because it's fine to be a startup, but you're not gonna be a startup forever. You're gonna become a clan culture, or you're gonna become a hierarchical culture, or a market-driven, competitive culture, and that's all okay. You just have to, figure out what makes the most sense for you and your team. And I just have one more thing to add. It's not just the relationship between you and your employees, it's also a relationship between you and your partners in the industry. We're an ancillary company, and so the way we treat our clients is part of culture as well. So, things to think about, because everything is culture at the end of the day.
Absolutely. No, couldn't have said it better myself. And I think, switching over, Melissa, would love to get your perspective, right? We just talked about, how to promote quality culture, but there are times where there are issues at organizations and, employment-related claims as it relates to maybe discrimination, harassment, being on the insurance side, we see those claims as well. What are some current employment-related claims you're seeing now, and how do you see that affecting the cannabis industry?
Yeah, thank you. So here's the lawyer in the room, which is everybody's favorite person. And I will start with some doom and gloom. As you know, I've spent the last 10 years litigating, and it's just, there's a way to spin that doom and gloom to a more proactive and productive mindset. But there are some real issues, right? And I'm based in New York, so my focus is definitely more East Coast. But I will say, as a nationwide firm, we have seen the current landscape of employment practices, not only in the hospitality industry, but in the cannabis industry, to be that of some turmoil. Because, as Eric said, there are ongoing discrimination claims, harassment, wrongful termination, wage and hour, which perhaps in cannabis, that isn't something that we're thinking of immediately when we're setting up our businesses, especially dispensaries as they start to pop up in New York. And it's something we really should be thinking about because, there are, you can screen, and you should screen as you hire your employees and conduct thorough screening. But to an extent, you only know somebody so well, right? And so things that might affect somebody to the point where they want to bring one of those types of claims, sometimes valid, sometimes not, comes from, in part, culture, right? What is the atmosphere that you are cultivating? And it's important to understand as an employer that the landscape, the current landscape, I should say, in this country specifically, is one of an employee-friendly scenario. And with that brings great risk to an employer. That doesn't mean you should not pursue your goals and your dreams and passions of opening up dispensary or a cultivation site or whatever that might be, but it means that you should 10,000% be taking whatever financial capital you have, even just a small part of it, and investing that in your team, and your team includes lawyers. And I'm not just saying that because I am one. Listen, as a litigator, you come in when people are at their worst. It's not enjoyable sometimes, but it's also a very counseling-heavy area of law. And so, you meet people when they need help. And there's ways to, and we'll get into that, there's ways to mitigate those risks, but it's critical to know what those risks are before you make decisions like crafting your culture, crafting your policies, crafting your employee handbooks, and things of that nature.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think something that's important that you said, it's like, this is not unique to cannabis. I think it's just something that has been, growing and making sure that you have quality employee engagement and creating a good culture will help alleviate some of those potential issues with the organization. And just to piggyback off that, what do you recommend from a legal perspective, Melissa, to mitigate risk on behalf of employer and position the employer for longevity and success?
Yeah, so this is where the more optimistic Melissa comes in. I'm also a yoga teacher, so I strike that balance between my litigation world and my healthy mindfulness practice. And I will say that, The first few things I think of are taking it from like the baby of the business, where there's the organizational component, the planning, the prep, with your partners, to determine like what does this culture, what do we want to create, like what are we looking to create here, and that includes everybody else you're about to bring onto the team, right? And then taking that a step further to the hiring process, where after the screenings have been done, after the offer letters have gone out, after the employees have been engaged, how are you onboarding them? So what types of documents are you providing to them to review, to ask questions about? Who can they ask these questions to? Do you have in-house HR that they can speak to? Or are you using a firm like ours where we have an employment practice and alongside our lawyers, we have a senior HR advisor, and then you have the onboarding docs, and what did you do with the onboarding docs? Where did you store them? Where are you uploading them? Who are you working with? Are you working with ADP? Are you working with, some sort of organization that's going to help you maintain that organization? Are you asking somebody like ADP the right questions? What are those questions? Probably should consult your lawyers or your HR advisors about those questions, right? People often do the bare minimum, to be honest. So if you don't ask, they probably won't tell you. And then you move on to the training. And that training should happen, let's focus on a dispensary, right? That training should happen day one on the job. And it's a full day, perhaps, where you have somebody come in and provide an on-site training. And then that training happens again, maybe mid-year, as a refresher. And the policies regarding those trainings are included in your employee handbooks. They're included in your manuals that you've not only provided to your employees, but that they've signed and that you've received back, so that when you are in a situation at some point down the road where there is some sort of claim made against your business, you have mitigated to an extent your liability risk, because you can show evidence, documentation and evidence that these documents have been signed. And then you continue to move down that line, and we're at now, how are you incentivizing your employees? Incentivizing them to do good work. Yes, people were hired and they should do their work, but the reality is there needs to be some what goals are you providing for them are you sharing with them? Like, yeah, we promote based on this, or we promote in this amount of years, or are you having those year-end reviews? Those types of things. Like, yes, it might not be the traditional corporate structure, but you should probably treat it in some regards as such, to help mitigate your risks. And then the last thing I'll say about that also is, depending on where your business is in its lifespan, are you offering any sort of opportunities for a buy-in? Like maybe not, depending on the role, but like if there is that opportunity, what types of conversations are you having with your employees about that? Again, linking that to incentivizing them.
No, that was great. And I think we've, obviously that's a different perspective and something to just be very mindful of, right? I think, from an organizational perspective, that's just one part of risk mitigation, and definitely very, very important to make sure that you have long-term success in the cannabis industry. Because sometimes it's not a matter of if, it's when, and so you just want to be prepared and make sure that you have the proper measures in place. We've talked about a lot of the onboarding process. Aisha's talked about how to attract top talent and how to create a culture that's inviting. Brett, I wanted to shift it to you. Talk to us about, how to support a culture. You have to retain employees, right? And so what are some strategies and things that you've seen in your role to help retain top talent and avoid turnover so that you can continue to build on your culture, right? Not have it reset.
Yeah, so let's start with the most basic thesis. you cannot have a culture without people. You cannot grow a culture if you are losing people every time. And that's just basic human thought. Taking it to the monetary side, right? You lose 20, 30, even 40% of a person's annual salary every time they turn over. And I don't remember who had it. I think it was a headset statistic. It was like the average person's first cannabis job lasts 4 months. Most people have 3 jobs in their first 2 years of cannabis. If you really think about that from your business's perspective, you're losing a crap load of money, right? Like every 3 months, you're losing someone's annual salary. That's not sustainable. And you have to keep people. So let's start with a real basic one that maybe not in this room, but some rooms need to hear it. Free weed is not an employee benefit. I'm gonna say it one more time, really loud. Free weed is not an employee benefit. But more seriously, right? Like we are at a point now where not getting paid on time is no longer acceptable, right? Like we are not a brand new baby startup industry. We're not a brand new group of people who just like came out of the black market, figured out that like, oh crap, I gotta get a bank account and like tell someone in some government office that I exist so I don't get arrested, right? Like we are a real burgeoning industry with real solutions and real professionals and real things. So the basics of retention are real simple. Pay your people on time, right? Offer them clear paths to growth, right? Offer them real benefits, real hours. Health care, 401ks, retirements. If you really want to get spicy with it, offer them some weird shit like pet insurance and accidental death and like the really good stuff, but that's what people want, right? Like that's the most basic part. And then the other part I think to remember is people don't really leave companies, they leave managers and people. And there is a phrase, right? One bad apple spoils the bunch, because that grows. It's an infection. And we can't afford that as cannabis operators, right? Like we are operating on hard mode. So like find a staffing agency, find a lawyer, find an HR provider, a payroll provider, find service providers that have a track record of success and let them do the hard part for you, right? Like you want to work in your business doing the thing you wanted to get into it for. Let people who specialize in it work on your business and help you grow it, because it's what we do every single day, like all of the time. So.
No, and just, oh.
I would say, you know, like we've been around for a few years, and I think when you look at the trajectory of a market, you know, comes up, it kind of plateaus off. We've got, I don't know, 25 directors kind of at this level, and one of the things that we're talking about right now that's front and center is how do we make sure we're not assuming we're just going to do the same thing we did a year ago or 6 months ago or 18 months ago, and that's the same with the leadership team, is we can't just assume that the benefits that we're offering are enough. How are we reinvesting back into them? And last week we had an offsite with all of our directors, and we brought in this guy who's a well-being expert. Quick show of hands. How many people in your room here, raise your hand, if you or you know somebody who's been depressed or anxious in their life? Okay. So he asked us that question. And he said about 15 years ago, I would ask the same question, about 30% of the people in the room would raise their hand. So here we got a group of professionals and we all raise our hand, about 95%. What is well-being, right? It's not benefits. It's not just, hey, we're going to give you the free weed or we're going to make sure we match your 401k. That's standard shit. That's what people expect. But with the hands that were raised, there's deeper things going on in people's lives where you kind of dig in, and that borders HR a little bit because we're not their therapist. So it kind of gets back to what are the wants and needs, and you got to really, really invest in the needs.
John, just one other thing that I wanted to, because when we got together yesterday, something that you said, shifting the paradigm of human resources to resources for humans. And I just thought that was very powerful, right? And can you just kind of provide a little bit more context to that?
I think HR from a stigma standpoint is, you know, you go to the HR folk when you have a challenge or you have an issue or you have a need. And I think if you reverse the content of the name human resources and you call it the resources or the resources of people, It's a different mindset, right? People don't want to just feel like they can go to HR just because they need something. No, we're here to provide the resources for you to be successful in life, right? And if you can think and apply and behave that way, like, it's a pretty good recipe, I think.
Absolutely.
Something to that?
Yeah, 1,000%.
I just want to add as well, in continuing what Brett was saying, you know, there's also this understanding that needs to really be embraced, frankly, by employers in a legitimate industry, such as the cannabis one, where everything we're talking about isn't really optional. It's required by law. So, you know, you have different statewide regulations and different statewide laws in regards to employment and labor practices, and that might differ, right, where you are, but there's also federal laws. And so, you know, to an extent, yes, there's things that are expected. They're also required. And then when you go above and beyond that, perhaps, and you offer an off-site retreat, or you bring in a yoga teacher to teach a class once a year, or you have, you know, a room that's comfortable and safe for a female to, you know, pump, you know, things like that, where somebody feels comfortable in the space that they're working. Maybe that's above and beyond, but it's also, there's rules, there's regulations around that, so it's important to keep in mind.
I think Brett wants to speak.
By the way, my office is the pumping room for all the, no, true story. Yeah, we got about 4.
That came off about as well as when MJ Unpacked made the joke about swimsuits optional for the after party, and we all read it as swimsuits optional, not the way they meant it. So on the legal part, though, I think we need to take this a step further to the human angle. Like, we all know laws have loopholes, and everybody loves to exploit them, right? Like, oh, I'll work them 37.74 hours because 37 3/4, like, people work around that. Don't do that. Stop it right now. Don't do that. Like, obviously don't put your company in jeopardy, but like, they are your people, invest in them. A realization I had while I was here is that the cannabis industry, particularly at a more like executive, like, you know, leadership level, is the closest most of us will ever feel to being in professional sports. So when you leave companies, when you jump around, you're still in the league. These are still your people. Like, people I used to work with are sitting right there, and I love her dearly, and we interact all the time, because this is cannabis culture. Your company culture is underneath and belongs to cannabis culture. So doing this like bare minimum thing ain't gonna cut it. I don't care what the law says. Don't skirt it. Don't jump for the loopholes. Treat your people good. Treat them better than good. Because real talk, Target down the street pays better than you, and they don't care if they smoke weed anymore either.
Can I do my little last thing too?
Absolutely.
Okay, so,
You have to mic drop when you're done, though.
I've always wanted to do that. You know, if we're talking about how to use capital, or, you know, consider culture as a function of capital, right? I think if you sum it up, Brett touched on this, the more you lose people, the more you have to replace people, that is going to cause a strain to your bottom line. When you have people who stay, when you have people who are engaged and who want to do well for you and who want to produce for your company, that's what's gonna drive your business. What do we always say? Like, culture eats strategy for breakfast. We don't say that just for fun. It's really, that is the gasoline behind your business. And so this is a hack that I'm gonna leave you with right now, because there's a lot of things that go into building strong culture. But one of the most important things that we've seen from our experience is really understanding the why behind the work. What is your why as a company to do the work you do? And what is the why of your employee and the people you interact with? Why are they doing what they do? When you understand that about who you're doing business with, it just makes it so much better, because you can speak to what actually is important to them. So really think about that. Think about what your why is that is going to center your work, and then try to find out what the why is of the person you're working with, right? That's gonna It just makes it more meaningful. So.